Welcome everyone to this Dealroom Talks on Urban Tech. I'm very glad to have this amazing panel with us today to really dive into some of the questions that we have around the rise of urban tech. Why is it happening? What are the reasons behind it? And probably also what more is needed in order to really get us out of the situation that we're in at the moment. What we'll do today is first of all, Lorenzo will kick us off with some of the highlights from the report that we just published, so that we all have a similar starting point and know some of the trends that are going on in this ecosystem. And then we'll bring it back, and you'll be able to see all of the panelists again. And I'll be asking them lots of questions to try and see if we can really get some value out of this here today. But also feel free to ask your own questions in the chat, because at the end we have a Q&A session. So I'll pick a few of the best questions that we see coming up, and maybe it's yours, and the whole panel will be able to respond to it. Also, feel free to stay on at the end, because there's an opportunity for networking with each other and with all of the panelists here today. So as you can already see, we've collected some amazing people here from the investment world, from the startup world, from the more city level and public sector world. So I think we'll have a very lively conversation. But I'll keep the best for last, in the sense of asking them to introduce themselves after Lorenzo has taken us through the highlights of the report. So Lorenzo, if you can take it from here, we'd love to see what you found on urban tech.
Sure, thanks, Liz. Hi, nice to meet you all. I'm Lorenzo from Dealroom, a B2B research lead. And as we just said, I'm gonna walk through a few insights from the report we recently published with 2150, our partner here, on urban tech. So first of all, why are we talking about cities and sustainability? But for two main reasons. First of all, cities are one of the major drivers of climate change themselves. In fact, they account for like 70% of global gas emission. And on the other side, they are acutely exposed to the risk deriving from climate change. So, for instance, 33% of the city may end up their current water resources by 2150. And on the same side, 50% of the future urban population may be exposed to extreme heat. So all these problems are really felt in the urban environment. So when we talk about urban sustainability, what we're talking about is both climate change mitigation and adaptation. So when we talk about mitigation, is like reducing the greenhouse emissions. So of course, we talk about clean energy, sustainable construction, sustainable materials used in buildings, and mobility. On the other side is adapting to the effect of this climate change. So we go from air pollution to water management, from the scarcity we just mentioned, also flooding, to extreme heat waves management. And of course, there's an overlap between mitigation and adaptation in many other segments. So basically, already now, we are, of course, feeling the effects of climate change, and there's an adaptation gap. So, and this is going to increase massively with every fraction of degree that we go more near toward the 1.5 limit and even beyond. So it's key to stay in the limit as much as possible and at the same time adapt to this. So when we're talking about urban tech, this is broadly all the kind of technologies that can improve the urban environments, make them more sustainable, resilient, and efficient. And so this goes from some enabling technology like carbon and biodiversity tracking and clean energy, to like the building of this urban environment, so the material used, the construction method used, so sustainable steel, cement, modular construction, and then the operation of these buildings. So we're talking about heating, cooling, urban mobility, and then the experience, so how people live in the city. So we're talking about air pollution, safety and security. All these topics are part of this broad world of urban tech. And if we look at all these kind of segments from in the startup world, 28 billion have been invested in this urban tech sector. This is quite a sizable amount, even if there's been some reduction from last year, which was really like a very strong year for global venture funding. But if we look at, or even just 2020, there's still a really strong growth. A lot of coming from the mega rounds that we see here as the two red stuff. But also, like, if we look at the early stage, so the green and blue part, we still see a strong trend and momentum, even removing that. Then, of course, this is like an aggregate. So which kind of segments have been driving this kind of growth? So if we look at the unicorns, so startup valued like 1 billion, 94 of the 109 urban tech unicorns are either in clean energy and grid technology or urban mobility and logistics. So these two segments are, of course, the one more mature, the one that have driven more attention. But what we can see is also that these categories that bundled here as other categories have been really ramping up in 2021 and 2022. So zooming into these other segments, the scene is more diversified. For instance, in this year, we saw two unicorns in ESG and carbon tracking, one in building energy efficiency, one in water tech. Last year, there was more construction materials, waste management, and infrastructure. So let's say the world of urban tech is also expanding a bit and going into also these segments, which were a bit overlooked by the venture capital industry till recently. And so what we're really looking for in urban tech is gigacorn. So detaching a bit from the narrative just about unicorns or valuation, a gigacorn is a company that have achieved lowering or sequestering 1 gigaton of CO2 equivalent emission every year, while also being commercially viable. Of course, these are really hard companies to find, but I like to put in perspective, we emit now 59 gigaton per year. So if we find just 59 of this, we would be done. Of course, it's not that easy. We are now 109 urban tech unicorn, but we have no gigacorn still. We are looking for them. And there's been quite a growth in this segment. So we had some fun going around and looking at, okay, how far are we from a gigacorn, looking at companies, very notable companies, and well, still pretty far. So we went a bit through the numbers for Tesla, for instance, and towards 2030, according to the company projection, of course, they would be near to the gigacorn size, let's say. And notably, most of this will come from solar and storage in the prediction, not really from electric vehicles. And this we are talking about avoided emissions. While from the sequestering of emission, we looked at Climeworks, which is the biggest direct carbon capture company. And their plan is to achieve a gigaton capacity, so these big plants that they use, towards 250. So gigatons are really something that is like more like an objective, like a goal that you have to keep in mind, but it's still hard to find them around. But if we have to find where could we find them in urban tech? We wanted to bring a bit the spotlight on two segments, which account for like a huge proportion of the global CO2 emission, which are building energy usage, which drives 27%, and building construction processes and material, which account for 10%. And these two segments have raised less than 2 billion this year. And this is actually pretty low compared to other segments like electric mobility, for instance, raised almost 14 billion, so 7 times more than these two segments combined. And looking, for instance, energy efficiency startup, we have seen 2022 has been a bit better than the year before, if we exclude like an outlier, but the growth has not been so exceptional. So there's still a lot to be done in this segment, which is key to the transition. Zooming in, this segment, when we talk about building energy efficiency, we talk about many segments going from smart home management apps focused on energy, efficient air cooling or heating appliances, and then also all the SaaS and IoT to manage heating and cooling in your house, energy retrofits, all these kind of segments. And still they attracted like 400 and something million this year, which is, it is something, but it's still, there should be like 10 times more maybe. And want to bring the spotlight on this segment because we are also going to discuss a bit in the panel, since we are having one startup here, Blue Frontier, which is operating in the efficient air cooling segment. So she's going to bring a bit of spotlight what has been done, which are the challenges, and how this segment can grow. So thank you all for the attention. We're gonna jump in the panel so to hear from the real expert on the segments, and happy to have you here today.
Thanks, Lorenzo. And so let's bring it back to the panel and see if we can make some sense out of what we are seeing in the report and what it means from different perspectives from different experts in the field. So first of all, I'd like to ask all of you, and I'll invite each of you one by one, to quickly introduce yourself and also tell us a little bit about how you got into urban tech. And maybe, Peter, you can start with that.
Very kind, and thanks so much for putting this event together. I'm really happy to be a part of it, and also very honored to be on a panel with so many experts in this field. So I'm Peter. I'm with 2150, a venture capital fund focused specifically on urban sustainability, where I lead our sustainability work. And how I got into urban tech, I mean, I hate to say it, but I've always been a climate nerd. Like from a very early stage, like it's what I studied in my initial degree, and then what I was able to double up on in my graduate studies as well. It's always been an area that's been a particular focus for me, sort of the impact of cities on how we live, on the world, and particularly in the climate, and being able to then now work in a space where ultimately we're driving for the solutions that help to transform cities the way that we need them to be by 2050 has been really exciting. And I want to give some more time to the other people on the panel who are the ones actually implementing some of these solutions as well.
Super, thanks. And maybe Emilie, you can follow up.
Yeah, definitely. And so glad to be here. And thank you for the report. I found it very, very useful. So I'm Emilie Hvidtfeldt. I am Director of Climate Action Engagement at C40, where I work across many of our climate solutions. So the solutions that we work with our cities on: transportation, waste, buildings, energy, air quality adaptation, etc. I'm in the Copenhagen office, and we're based in what's called Blocks Hub, which is like a hub of actually urban tech and innovation. So it's very inspiring to be there and be in touch with startups and urban tech in general day to day. And just a little bit about C40. So C40 is a network of global megacities. We sometimes compare ourselves a little bit to the kind of G20 of nation states. The cities are working together. But very different from what G10-20 is, that these cities have very, very high ambitions on climate change or solving the climate crisis. So so I saw in the report that one of the key conclusions was that the battle for climate change will be won or lost in how we manage emissions from cities, and I very much agree on that statement. And just to say that the mayors, as part of C40, is very aligned with that message, and working day to day on solving the climate crisis together. So it was good. I look forward to this panel.
Thanks. Okay, Daniel, can you go next?
Absolutely. Thank you. And again, it's an extraordinary honor to be speaking among such distinguished people. So it's an incredible honor. I'm the CEO of Blue Frontier, and I've been working in the clean tech space since 1997. And I started in the area of advanced transportation systems, looking at fuel cells and electric vehicles, and realized that while there was a lot of effort being done in that space, the urban tech environment in terms of buildings was underrepresented in the investment space. and in the innovation space. And so I sort of pivoted towards what I thought was, and I think is one of the hardest problems in the building energy efficiency space, which is resolving all the problems associated with air conditioning, which is the fastest growing use of electricity in buildings around the world. And so I started Blue Frontier in 2017 among a group of other extraordinary engineers and scientists, and we worked very closely together with National Renewable Energy Labs to develop a completely new air conditioning technology that can be 3 times more efficient than the conventional one. But more interestingly, it is also has embedded energy storage, which would enable us to have not only resiliency, adaptability, flexibility, coupled with energy efficiency. So that's what drives me nowadays, is to make sure that we run to deploy this technology as fast as possible in a global scale. The slogan of our company is "Before it's too late." So we have to run faster than the problem. So that's what's driving me.
Thanks. And Sonam, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you again for having me. Thanks to all of you for being here on Zoom. I'm actually dialing in from Egypt from COP27, so I feel like I'm very much so in the thick of this discussion right now. But again, I'm Sonam Velani. I'm the founder of Streetlife Ventures. We are a venture studio and a fund building the sustainable hardware of cities. Everything from porous concrete to recycled asphalt and anything in between, right? So things like urban infrastructure systems and the built environment, particularly in cities globally. For me, climate has been a story basically throughout my entire life. I grew up in Chicago and I was an undocumented immigrant. My family had migrated from Mumbai in India, and we landed in Chicago, with basically nothing, and we lived next to a water reclamation plant. So flooding and environmental issues have sort of been a part of my life since day one. And when I got to college, I was like, I'm going to do something about this, right, and tackle some of these issues head on. So since then, I've actually worked across the board, across the public and private sectors, from infrastructure finance to working in cities across Asia on building infrastructure that doesn't fall apart during an earthquake or hurricane or other natural disaster, and using data to do so, as well as working at City Hall in New York, doing a lot of different things related to infrastructure and affordable housing, but specifically working on developing New York City's climate plan. So how we as a city are going to get to net zero by 2050, which I think many of us can attest is no small undertaking. And writing the plan, I realized, we don't have enough companies to meet the mandates that we have set for ourselves. So that one thing led to another, and Streetlife Ventures was born. So again, happy to be here and excited to dive in.
Super. Thanks a lot. And thanks for that personal note. I just remembered that I didn't properly introduce myself either. So maybe just so people know, I'm Lieselore Havermans, the head of research at Dealroom. So all of the research that you see coming out is being worked on by the whole team. This is one that I think is really an amazing theme to focus on, because of course impact is really one of the major focus areas that we have at Dealroom, and that I think we should all have as humanity, because we can't really get around it. And of course, a lot of that is happening in cities, in urban tech. So it's great to see this spotlight on it. And what I think, like from what Lorenzo showed us, it's very clear that to see the trend, right, of when you look at venture capital, the investments in urban tech startups have been going up, and it's nothing compared to where it was 2018 and before. The same you see in terms of the number of unicorns, urban tech unicorns that you see popping up. And I was just wondering, I think here we have an amazing group of people together that can really help us understand a bit more, like, why is this happening? What are the drivers behind it? And of course, there's probably thousands, but maybe you can pick out one or two that you think are really the main things driving this. And I'm not sure, but maybe it's actually an interesting space to start with. Sonam for this.
Sure. So my favorite stat that I basically give in every single presentation that I do, and anybody I talk to about this stuff, is that 75% of the urban infrastructure of 2050 is yet to be built. That is a lot of stuff to build, right? And put shovels into the ground and actually think about hardware solutions, and particularly how we're going to make all of this growth in urban areas sustainable, right? And the report highlights the growth of cities, and frankly, in tandem, the growth of investments needs to follow. So there's a huge human need for all of this, given the number of people living in cities, both today and going forward. Before this, we were talking about how the 8th billionth person was born this week, apparently. And that person is going to be living for the next 80 to 100 years, right? So the stuff that we build today, and I think a lot of us think about this, is going to be around for the next 100 years. And how do we make sure that that's sustainable as we're putting shovels into the ground and as we're investing our money into these issues?
Mm-hmm. So for you, one of the main drivers of it is just the sheer number of what still, like the volume of what still needs to be built in cities.
Yes, exactly. And I think, there's a difference between, in the Western world, a lot of it is retrofitting and fixing what we have, right? And rebuilding systems to make them much more sustainable. And in emerging markets, I'm like literally dialing in from Egypt, right? Where there's a construction site on this side and on this side. So making sure that what we're building going forward is also sustainable.
Yeah.
I think there's another angle to add to that, though, because there's demand for new infrastructure and obviously growth within urban environments. I think 55% of the population today is living in cities. Is going to be 68% in 2050. That's definitely a driver. But in urban tech specifically, I think there's this connotation within it that it has this sustainability undertone. So there's this climate focus as well. And where we see sort of some growth in the urban tech sector is this rapid acknowledgement that ultimately sort of the sustainable solution is the one that's able to deliver more than just economic value. It's helping to mitigate risks from other issues like climate change. It's helping to potentially decrease your energy bills if you're more energy efficient. That ultimately the sustainable business model or sustainable product is rapidly becoming, and in many cases already is, the one that is the most economically competitive. And so while I would love to be able to attribute sort of a rapid recognition towards the need to decarbonize cities and increase them for resilience, I also think that there are economic wins in our favor at the moment that's helping to create this shift. And now it's a matter of, I think, pass it to Daniel and just actually getting the technologies that deliver on that dual mandate where you have economic incentives, but also climate incentives with the technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I see is that for sure, everything that we know is going to change. Everything that our civilization is undergoing a crisis, but also an extraordinary opportunity. And we are living in a moment of extraordinary innovation and collaboration among us humans. There are 8 billion people, which puts a lot of strain, but also there are a lot of 8 billion minds that can be applied to creating extraordinary solutions. And so that's an extraordinary opportunity economically and for development. At Blue Frontier, that's one of the things that drives us. We've developed a technology that we're passionate about because air conditioning is essential for that urban environment. So air conditioning is a major driver of productivity, comfort, health outcomes. Indoor air quality drives also comfort, and it's an essential part of living in the urban environment. You need to be able to have places that are at peace from the chaos that 8 billion people in the world, and all of majority of them living in cities, create. And this is an essential part of development. So when we approached the problem of creating technology for this space, we're looking for both providing extraordinary flexibility to the building so that the building can accommodate the grid and the people. So the way that we've developed that technology, it has embedded energy storage in order to enable us to tie the electricity consumption of our system to renewable energy and not consume electricity when renewable energy is not available, reducing, then your building becomes part of the solution for energy storage and grid resiliency through the equipment that you're buying for your building, which you need, air conditioning. The other thing that we have done is that the air conditioner is way more flexible, so we can change control of humidity and temperature independent of each other, allowing us to provide, to tie the air conditioning load, to actually address the actual air conditioning load of the building rather than being blind to it and just providing cold air and making people sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes well. All of that enables for further reductions in energy consumption, but also creating an improvement over the conventional technology, which I think is important for urban tech, and is part of the things that drives the sector, is that when we start looking at new technology, that technology journey of new tech opens up doors of improved lifestyles and improved interactions with our built space that weren't there before, which makes our lives, enriches our lives, and creates new economic opportunities. One of the issues that people think about in the doom and gloom scenarios of our pathway towards sustainability is that we do have to replace, retrofit, or build everything anew, right? And we think, well, we're destroying a lot of assets, but in reality, those assets are being enhanced to create new opportunities for human development, and that's the mindset that we have also in
Thanks.
developmental systems.
So I think a lot of doors already being open towards a lot of different areas of discussion. Maybe Emilie, indeed, you can, if you have anything to add specifically on the drive.
So I think as from our perspective, or kind of the city policy political perspective, I think there's also been a travel of cities being more and more important constituencies in the kind of global climate sphere. And I think after what C40 did after the Paris Agreement was made, it was to see, okay, how can the cities, what are the cities contributing to deliver the Paris Agreement? So one of the things that we've been working with the cities on is developing a climate action plan. So actually looking at, and first of all, looking at where are the biggest emitters in the cities, in the cities as a whole. It's just, of course, building, transportation being huge parts of it, but also what are the specific emissions coming into the cities, and what are then the most effective initiatives that the city can take on building, transportation, waste, etc., to bring down and reach those commitments that actually will lead to them being part of solving, meeting the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement. And I think this kind of intel, such as that the cities are then putting out and delivering in collaboration with not only themselves and their own plans, but also together with businesses, but together with civil societies in the cities. It's also like, we have these 10 challenges, please help us solve them. I think that's also at least been part of what has been driving that it's easier to then, they're also, as part of this process, they also have a principle of open governance, open data, making knowledge available, being more trusty I come from Denmark, and Copenhagen has always been good at working with businesses, but in many other countries, cities, then this trust between the public and the private sector has been more difficult. And I think that's building up that trust, and that also enables more opportunities for open tech and investments coming into cities specifically.
And maybe indeed, because you now also bring up more of the perspective from the public sectors and from the cities themselves, maybe we can stay with that for a bit longer and see, like, if these public-private partnerships are so important to the success urban tech and of the impact that we can have with it. What are maybe, and you already said trust is maybe one of the main challenges in a lot of cities and countries. Are there other challenges that you see, maybe you, Emilie, first, in terms of making public-private partnerships work?
Well, I think trust is one. Procurement is another one. Then this kind of conversation between the different actors, and I think we've seen entities being set up, advisory boards with multiple players in the city, and as a tool to kind of break down some of those. I think data as well is probably also a key challenge, and kind of the GDPR and that side of data.
You mean the data that's needed by the private sector in order to make urban tech effective?
Exactly, sharing of data. We've seen so many, like the smart city open data platforms. How do we get that out and functioning? And I think this has been on the agenda for many years, right? And I'm not sure it's been solved yet. What I think we're seeing as well is this, as Peter was mentioning before. It's important for cities that it has an economic benefit, but actually when working with the public sector, it's also equally important to factor in social inclusivity, equity, social sustainability as well. And I think this is, from the report was also highlighted, I think this is very positive that this is definitely becoming more and more a key part of the DNA of urban tech and startups. So I think that's very positive.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Daniel or Peter, do you have anything to add from your side to what you see working and not working in public-private partnerships?
I'll start. Absolutely. Emphasizing on access to data. That's game-changing for the development of technology in a smart way. There's a lot of wasted time and a lot of failure due to not meeting the demands of the market that are real demands of the market, due to not having enough information about it. In particular for startups, the wrong first product is your death nail, even if your technology is fantastic. So access to data that would enable us to have a clear voice of the customer and have the capacity to deploy and develop intelligently is absolutely essential. So I'm so glad that Emilie brought that up. And the other part is on inclusivity. I think that's also essential. Cities, if you want to democratize green tech and clean tech, cities is where your stakeholders live. That's where the majority of the world lives. And the benefits of clean tech must be reflected to the city environment, but also the city stakeholders and people in the inhabitants of the cities can become participants in the economic benefits of what's happening. So one of the things that we think about a lot here at Blue Frontier is how do we ensure that we create business models that enable adoption of technology in a widespread manner without, by eliminating those barriers to entry that are associated with capital and capital structures. And so we are pioneering something called HVAC as a service that we're trying out as a market entry point, which we create subscription-based models associated with adoption of that technology that are tied also to the benefits that we're providing to the utility and to the building owner based on reductions in, dramatic reductions in energy consumption. Similar models may exist for, more complex system-wide level implementation, but the more people are involved in the clean energy revolution from an economic benefit standpoint and also from an implementation standpoint, the more support there will be for that implementation.
Thanks. And I'd love to also take a moment later to get back also to the social side of things, but maybe if either Sonam or Peter still has something to add on public-private partnerships and the challenges of that.
First, welcome back, Sonam. It sounds like it was touch and go there for a second.
The power literally went out, and I think they may have either fixed it or turned on a generator. So I apologize for missing a few minutes of that.
But you're back.
So I think in the PPP space, I think taking just like a step back from like looking at sort of the setup of the PPP itself and thinking about sort of what are the conditions that ultimately help to make PPPs that will drive for, I guess, like sustainable tech or I guess or sustainable municipal infrastructure. What we're seeing, and in my previous work, I was working in a development bank, that there's actually sort of a policy framework or sort of an objectives framework. This is something that I'm sure C40, you work with this all the time, that if a city sort of is able to set out a specific vision for the sustainability of the sector or the infrastructure space in which that PPP will be operating, that can inherently give an advantage to those technologies that are ultimately coming in to deliver on that goal. And so an example, like we could see for LL97, right, in New York City, where you have a CO2 standard when it comes to per square foot for larger buildings within New York, that changes the calculus all of a sudden in terms of how you deliver energy systems within the city. Because it's shifting you away from just business as usual to ones that are helping you to manage that policy risk and ultimately the fee that the city is bringing in. So I think there's ways that public institutions can leverage their power even before you get to the table to start to talk about a PPP that will create that sort of success to drive for both a goal as well as ultimately hopefully create a productive partnership out of it as well.
Super. And so now maybe before you jump into that, I do think that probably a large part of our audience will be quite deep into this space as well. But but let's try to actually use as little acronyms as we can with
public-private partnership. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So that everyone can follow and doesn't have to be Googling at the same time.
I appreciate it. I'll call me out on the jargon. That's good. That's good.
And Sonam, please jump in.
Yeah, and LL97 is local law 97. I actually I spent eons of my life, probably got a lot of gray hairs during the process putting that together in New York City, but it's basically our buildings law, right? And I think it's a very, very good example, as Peter highlighted, of what I often call policymakers as market makers, right? So New York City put this law out, and it was a part of One NYC, our broader Green New Deal, and again, some of the other things that we're doing to reduce emissions and build adaptation resilient solutions. But we basically said, okay, well, we have to put this out there and think about what the carrot and stick approach should be, but then also ensure that as new solutions come up, how can we support all of this innovation as a result of this law that we designed, right? So at Streetlife, we actually call this the age of climate industrialism, right? It's where innovation, industrialization, and urbanization are going hand in hand. And a lot of that is happening in cities, given the role of cities in the legislative process and in the rulemaking process. And I think cities are some cities are doing this very well and others are getting there. And partial to New York, I have to say that in New York, we actually have physical places where a lot of this new experimentation, whether it's on buildings, technology, or otherwise, can happen. We have Governor's Island, where we're launching a new climate solution center. It's transforming a former Army base into an R&D hub with 7,000 new jobs for all skill levels, right? Or Lansing, Michigan, GM is building a new EV battery plant there. And the local school district is working with a startup called GreenLink Education to retrofit the city's school buildings and make them more energy efficient, and design training programs to ensure that students are learning about the manufacturing process and are primed for apprenticeships when the plant opens, right? And these jobs are well-paying jobs. They pay $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 a year, just starting salaries. Or a few weeks ago, actually a few months ago now, over the summer, I was in Alaska where I met the Alaska Ocean Cluster in the city of Anchorage, which is an accelerator supported by the city government. And they're building these very cool, sail drones and aquaculture sensors, and they're benefiting the city's ports and maritime economy. So I think all of this is about the role of cities, not just to create policy, but also to house R&D and create jobs as they adopt and deploy climate tech solutions to achieve all these goals that we've all written on paper.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Yeah. And based on what we were discussing before, and Peter already saying that now we have the economic wins in our favor, right, for urban tech, especially when it comes to new technologies that actually help you save costs. And I'm wondering from all of you, like, we've also been talking a little bit already, touching upon social inclusion, and which of course probably has less of economic wins in its favor. How do you see that playing out within the urban tech sphere? Whoever wants to take it. I see Sonam like already very.
You can tell that I personally care a lot about this, right? Just given my upbringing, right? A big reason why I do this work is because I want people coming after me to not have to live in basement apartments that flood, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because your water system or your water plant doesn't work properly, right? So this is like very, very personal to me, and I think we are now at a time when the federal government finally is actually recognizing some of these things and translating a lot of that down into the local government as well. So I'll just highlight one big example here in the US where the federal government has an initiative called Justice 40, and it's to make sure that 40% of all investments of both the infrastructure bill and the more recent Inflation Reduction Act are being distributed to communities that are most impacted by some of these injustices, right? And have been throughout history. And it's really thinking about how can we, as federal government, use our resources and put mandates as to where this money is spent, and then local governments working with community organizations and working with entrepreneurs to make sure that those business models work, when some of these subsidies do go away, as Daniel was highlighting. So it might mean that when a city like New York says, okay, we want to put EV chargers in the streets, working with the entrepreneurs to, ensure that the first place they go in is the South Bronx, which is a very, poor neighborhood in New York City, versus Midtown Manhattan, right, which is probably one of the wealthiest zip codes in the world. So I think it's a lot of, again, city policy making, but also leveraging federal funding and working with the startups sort of from day one to figure out where that deployment happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to add that we cannot underestimate the aspect of social sustainability and cultural sustainability as part of a overall sustainability solution. If we create sustainability by making a group of already wealthy people wealthier and creating wealth in the already wealthy areas of your city while maintaining or making life worse or for the majority of the other people, you will have revolutions. It's a requirement to have as part of the sustainability solution, to have it be inclusive and have the widest range of beneficiaries and participants in it. And so we got to think about technology deployment as and sustainability in those terms, or else we'll end up with headwinds that are very, very difficult to overcome. And we see that already happening across the world in many political places, political systems. So
I think to the stats that Lorenzo showed initially in his presentation, that like zooming out from just a singular urban level, just sort of like cities across the world, that the majority of cities are going to have some form of extreme exposure to either heat, flood, water scarcity. Yeah. This is inherently something that's going to be, unfortunately, affecting those populations that already don't have the same advantages as the developed world. So in terms of social inclusion, you have to think about how do these climate technologies address what are going to be exacerbated climate risks. And I love Blue Frontier's solution in that it can have its feet both in the developed and developing world, considering the literal terawatt hours of cooling that are going to be needed in developing countries. But trying to have that context, at least for 2150, when we invest, thinking about, is this solution something that ultimately can spread beyond North America, the richer parts of East Asia and Europe? And can this be a solution that helps to drive sustainability in a much wider geographic sense is really core to what we think about. Finding those specific opportunities, though, that have that reach takes an ability to think about it from both of those contexts, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just one last piece that I would add, and I think Daniel, really hit the nose on the head, is, what are the technologies that we're building and how are we making sure that they get to the communities that need it most? But as venture capitalists, making sure that the people we're funding to actually build these technologies also are one part of the process, and two, coming from those same communities, right? And I think VC as an industry has traditionally been extremely lopsided in terms of where the money goes, right? So using our collective power to change that, not just in climate, right, and urban tech and the industries that we work in and have influence in, and really thinking creatively about that redistribution of wealth that needs to happen.
Yeah. And I would add one more thing to this real quick. So the challenge of crossing over to the in terms of inclusivity and traditionally unrepresented areas with the new technology has to do with the infrastructure for financing and being able to bring together the multidimensional benefits that the technology provides to all these stakeholders that are there. I think that, like, for example, we see it with Blue Frontier. Certain places in North America, it's relatively easy to take advantage of the benefits that we provide to the utility partners to deploy and subsidize early deployment of technology in a wide range. But those, creating those conditions from a legal standpoint, contractual standpoint, financial standpoint, requires governance that may not exist to the level that is necessary outside. And so we recognize in our approach that we must get to economies of scale, which drops the cost of the product to such a level that we do not require that multidimensional structures to enable our technology to be put in place, and then open up, and it opens up really interesting business models associated with then, once you get to that, eliminate the green price premium. That's our goal ultimately. But crossing that chasm, it's one of the biggest challenges that we will have.
Thanks. And of course, Emilie, I think people are already looking a bit at you in the sense of, like, you represent more of the public sector here today, and I think that has been mentioned quite a lot in making sure that this transition is also not just a green transition, but also a social one.
Exactly. And I think that was also my key point, is that for many mayors and cities, actually the starting point, if you are looking at the portfolio of climate action that needs to be implemented, the starting point is not the emissions that are going to be driven down by these actions, but actually the health, well-being of citizens, the clean air that will also less pollution, better access to transportation, more equitable access to transportation access, etc., is kind of the starting point. And actually access to food, so all of these more citizens focused, also climate is of course high on citizens priorities as well, but access to food, access to clean transportation, etc., is as high, and often the starting point for entering a discussion on climate change. We see it in London, for example, when implementing the zero emission zones, where the mayor is talking about air quality, access to the clean air near schools, etc., not climate as an entry point. So this is not to be missed.
Super. And I think there as well, this discussion really reminds me of some of the research I did before I joined Dealroom, when I was the head of research at Scale Up Nation, and we did a study together with World Economic Forum about trailblazers. And then that was specifically focused on circular trailblazers. But I think in general, what we need in spaces like this is not just the next unicorn that can do what, like, ride the wave that has already been created, basically, but also the ones that really blaze the trail for the next generation to come and take on all of those extra challenges that are needed to get to new solutions and to get to a good policy environment that they can land in and thrive by themselves. I see that we have actually a very interesting question from Yuri Milevsky from the audience. I'll read it to you, and I think at least it would be great if Sonam can take it, because it was also directed towards you. He's writing, it would be interesting to hear a bit more about the challenges of venture capital in particular and other forms of funding in Africa. African cities will be the fastest growing cities in the world in the next decades, while the funding to make that growth right is extremely limited. Maybe some insights from Sonam from COP27, or Emilie or Peter. But Sonam, if you can take it first.
Sure, I'll start off. I think every market has risk, right?
Mhm.
The US startups certainly have risk. I think we've seen a lot of that transpire over the past couple of months in terms of implosions and valuation decreases. So I think it's up to an investor to think about sort of what level of comfort he or she has with the risk in a particular market. In the US, yes, you might have, or in Western countries, you might not have as much political risk, right? But you certainly have other types of challenges, whereas in Africa, it might be completely different. A lot of the conversation here at COP has actually been around what can bilaterals, multilaterals, some of these international financial institutions do to help alleviate that risk, whether it comes in the form of debt guarantees or insurance products to different companies to make investors feel comfortable putting their money into this market. But I think, we were talking about earlier, I couldn't agree more. Like the vast majority of that population growth, right, the 9th billionth and likely 10th billionth person is going to be born on this continent. So the economic, the financial, the social opportunity is massive. And just a handful of companies that I personally am interested in. Basigo is a Kenyan company. They do electric buses. They just raised a Series B round to expand their fleet. Shift EV here in Egypt is thinking about electric fleets, and particularly around last mile delivery, doing sort of small scale cargo delivery to reduce congestion on the streets. So there are lots of innovations happening here, right? And I do think, and maybe Peter, you can talk a little bit about this as well, right? The role of some of these bilaterals and multilaterals to accelerate that investment can certainly help.
And then I think it will be good if Peter, if you would like to jump on that chance, that we use that as sort of to round off. But sure, I'm hoping everyone will stay on for lots of questions after during the networking. But Peter, go ahead.
To be honest, I think I'd rather pass the time to Emilie, because I think there are a few African cities specifically in the C40 network that would be really interesting to hear what the sort of specific initiatives that they have that are, what are the challenges that they're seeing for their potential rapid growth. I can talk about EBRD in my previous job all I want, but I think there's some on the ground insight from Emilie that we can get.
Super.
Yeah, you might elaborate on venture capital. I think this is a huge challenge in our African cities. Some of the ways that we and especially on adaptation. So this is very attracting investments for adaptation projects, and is in general very, very difficult, and I think in Africa specifically as well. So So we try to work with our cities and the African Development Bank, but also other banks on how to create these pipelines to make it projects investable, etc. But I think, as Sonam was also mentioning, there's a lot of innovation. We see that in our cities, and they're actually really interested, especially in regards to kind of community building, how to engage the local communities in creating. In investing in their cities. And we have an example from Freetown where they have planted 500,000 trees across 300 plus communities to tackle flooding, mudslides, etc., tackle deforestation in their cities. And these measures in tree planting has improved water security, reduced floods, etc., etc. And I think this is an example of we've seen across many cities. But what's really interesting about this case is that it's supported by this community-based model of innovative tracking through an app designed by a company called Greenstand, and it creates like a unique geotagged ID for each tree planted, and then the growers can then revisit the trees and nourish them and ensure that they're maintained and sustained by this app and document its growth, and thereby get funding by our mobile pay, micro payment systems, etc. And this has like created this amazing record of long-term survival rate of about 80% of the tree investments planted. It created thousands of jobs for especially local communities, women, youth, etc. So and it sustained an adaptation solution and made it economically viable. And I think this is examples such as these that we're seeing around in our African cities leading.
Just want to add quickly, Sonam, I really like the example of Shift EV, because I think what that company's doing, and then we've seen it with others, they're looking at sort of like what's the local context of the infrastructure to work with, and then what's the development pathway specifically for those countries, that they won't be able to follow the exact pathway towards low carbon tech that maybe some countries in Europe have. It's going to have to take a slightly different route, and Shift EV, which is moving ICEs over into EVs, is helping to look at that infrastructure and then build a business model around it, rather than just saying go out and buy a brand new electric vehicle.
Exactly. Great. So I think we could go on for ages, but for now, I would love to thank you all for your super valuable insights. I invite everyone that's here live to stay on for a bit of networking after. But for now, just thank you all. I think it has been an amazing, very lively conversation. Good to shed some light on what's happening in urban tech, and looking forward to continuing the conversation in the years to come. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.